Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Culture Cast. I'm Chris Tash, and I'm joined once again by my good friend, the host of the Projection Booth podcast, everyone's favorite internet movie reviewer guy, Mr. Mike White.
My vengeance will flow with rivers of blood.
Oh, dear God. And you're gonna... So here's the thing about this movie. Every time I looked at the character of Ogami-itto, I thought that I was looking at you. For some reason... For some reason, the character of the Lone Wolf reminded me of you, and I couldn't figure out why. It may have been like a post-weed haze, but I was like, this reminds me so much of Mike. Like, I don't know if this is like Mike from another time, but Tomisaburô Wakayama is just like, I'm like, that's Mike White, just in the flesh, the Japanese flesh, nonetheless.
I will take that as the best compliment I can possibly have.
It is a compliment. So if you don't know what we're talking about already, we're going to be continuing Samurai September with a look at the first in the Lone Wolf and Cub series. No, we're not talking about Shogun Assassin. We are talking about Lone Wolf and Cub, Sword of Vengeance. Film was released in 1972, directed by Kenji Misumi. It is based on Lone Wolf and Cub by Kaozu Koke and Goseki Kojima. That is a manga, actually. It stars Tomisaburô Wakayama as Lone Wolf, aka Ogami-itto, and Akihiro Tomikawa as his son Ogami Daigoro. So, Mike, I know you've got a lot to say about these movies because you were gushing last week when I talked with you about them off the air, so I'm curious, what did you think revisiting Lone Wolf and Cub?
Oh, God. I love these movies, and I will watch them any day of the week, though I don't because I try to make every one of them a special occasion. And these movies, I love sharing with people. So when you said that you were doing this as part of your Samurai September, I was so excited because as far as I know, you hadn't seen them before. So I was just like, yay, I can't wait for Chris's reaction because these are movies that I go out of my way to say people need to see these.
Well, you would be correct in that assumption. I had never seen any of the movies this month. Like I said on the last episode, I have very little to no exposure to samurai films. I mean, I've seen Quentin Tarantino's films, which are, fucking ripoffs of most better samurai films, which is unfortunate that most American audiences, their exposure to samurai is through the lens of a middle-of-the-road filmmaker. And then, as most people have probably seen Seven Samurai. They've seen Star Wars, which cops heavily from samurai films. And, I'd be hard-pressed to find most people that haven't seen or know about Clint Eastwood in The Man with No Name trilogy, which again is, at least the first one, is very, very, very similar to Yojimbo, to the point of essentially it just being an American retelling. But in regards to Lone Wolf and Cub, I had never seen it, and I am glad that I watched it because unlike last week, it's easy to follow, it's a lot of fun, and the lead character is so cool and interesting. It's a cool premise on top of the movie itself, but the premise is so interesting and cool that you can't help but just be enthralled by not only the characters, but also Tomisaburô Wakayama's performance, which, as far as anything I've seen samurai movie-wise, he is exactly what I expect from a samurai character in the best way.
He is just awesome, and I love his cool delivery. And to see him go from him at the beginning, where he's really kind of, he's got the tight hairdo and everything, to just a few minutes later when they kind of cut to 2 years, 3 years later, and his hair is just all out of sorts, and he's just the most portly samurai that I've come across in a long time. So he kind of reminds me of like Sammo, where you don't expect him to move as quick as he moves. And of course, some of it is camera trickery as far as like him flying through the air and throwing spears and stuff. But man, he is so great to watch.
Well, he really makes it believable that a man of my size could be a samurai, because he's not like a slender Toshiro Mifune. He is a bigger guy. And it's cool. It's a cool character. He is what I expected from a samurai in a lot of respects, but in some other respects, not so much. And I think that that's what's cool about his character, and the fact that he has his son with him. And they also go into his like backstory with his son, about how he kind of gives his son a choice about whether or not he wants to come with him on this journey of vengeance. And I thought that that was all really cool. It's a very cool samurai film in that it kind of shirks the conventions that I assumed that were going to be in this film, and is a little bit more forward thinking in a way. And I think that that obviously comes to play because of the fact that this is based off of source material that itself was very forward thinking.
Right. And with the source material, what they were able to do was to move things around, put different pieces together. So if you read the original manga, like you'll see how like certain things from the first issue end up in the last movie, and things from the second issue end up in the fourth movie, and just they use these as like building blocks for you, so you get to see all of these different things get pieced together, and sometimes there are like mini adventures within the adventure. So in this one you've got the backstory of how Ogami-itto got to be on his quest for vengeance, and then you also have him being hired as an assassin and going through that narrative arc as well, and then doing flashbacks back to the early days. So it's nice that they give us like the two side-by-side adventures happening in here. It's a really nice narrative convention that they're doing. And then when they do the flashbacks, especially when you have the kids bouncing the ball and singing their little song about, what was it, throwing a frog off a mountain and he'll shit or something like that.
Yeah, and the turd will roll around in the sand.
Which is funny because that song comes back later on in another episode, because as soon as they started to sing it, I was like, I know this song from another one of these movies. So, but yeah, it's nice that they use that, and they use the ball to take us back into Ogami's memories with the whole idea of the ball being there for his son. Either choose the ball and join your mother in death, or choose the sword and come with me on my path to vengeance. And when Daigoro's Ogami blood chooses the sword, he's just like, man, that's a tough choice, kid. You're gonna have a really rough life. But and you wonder how many dead bodies this kid has seen over his entire life.
A lot. And I also like that, obviously, because this is a larger story that they're telling, clearly. I mean, this is part one of, God, what is it, like? Six
Candy films. Yeah.
Right. The seventh film is the dubbed version of this movie, some like 12 minutes of this movie, and most of the second film. Right.
That's Shogun Assassin. But then there's also, it's kind of neat, there's a TV movie that kind of wraps things up. And in that, it was made so many years later that they actually have the guy who played Ogami-itto in the TV series. He's back as Ogami-itto. And then Tomisaburô Wakayama is back as Lord Retsu Yagyu in that movie. So he plays his own enemy in that film, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, because I was going to say that's the other thing, I really like about this, is that the main villain in this film gets away. You never see him get his comeuppance.
Right.
Which motivates me to watch more. I mean, if I didn't like the movie enough as it was anyways, but I'm also motivated now because I want to see how the story plays out.
And that guy plays that character, I think, in at least 2, if not 3 movies, but he gets replaced eventually, and unfortunately his replacement doesn't give his great delivery.
Oh my
The whole thing where he speaks like this.
Where he is speaking essentially through his teeth.
Oh, I love it.
His jaw is clenched, his teeth are clenched, and he is just going for it. And like you said, it's amazing.
Oh,
it's also, again, like very stereotypical. Like when I think of like Orosoryo, like when you do that, just like stereotypical samurai noise, that's essentially what this is.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, I mean, again, that's reflects the fact that this is comic book inspired.
Oh yeah, and the action, it's very comic booky. The blood is phenomenal. I love the blood effects in these movies. It's just ridiculous. Oh my God, it's so good.
Red sprays of blood. At one point, a character gets decapitated, and there's just slow-mo of his body falling down with blood just shooting into the air.
So good and so beautiful too, right? I mean, the movie is shot so lovely. Like that opening where it's silent and you finally start to hear the cries of these guys who are crying out because their lord is going to be decapitated and kind of commit like a symbol of harakiri, and the way that they come in, and then that shot of them down at the bottom of the frame, the walkway that the one guy is leading the lord down, and he's all dressed in white. The little lord is dressed in white, and then you can see the tops of the set and everything. It's just gorgeous stuff. And what you're talking about as far as like the headless body and the blood spraying up, it's against this beautiful sunset. I mean, my gosh, this movie looks fantastic.
Well, yeah, it's a really well shot film, and I think that also helps with the staying power of the film, because the blood and guts and decapitations and maimings and dismemberments and disemboweling are fun, but it also has to look good, because that's one of the things I kind of always equate with samurai cinema is kind of the ability to really craft a well put together shot and make it look beautiful, because I mean, you're filming in these locations that are in and of themselves beautiful on their own.
Right.
So the fact that Mizumi really got as much out of it as humanly possible is fantastic, because they look like those Japanese paintings to some extent. And I think that's really great. And again, it echoes the fact that this is based off of a manga.
Yeah, and the manga was almost like the storyboards for the movie. There are shots inside of the manga where it just looks like Misumi was like, okay, yeah, that's how I'm going to shoot this. I mean, not everything was done like that. It's not completely like a storyboard, but there are moments, like especially that duel that we're talking about. And it's interesting, the version that I watched today, because I've got a couple different versions of this, and the version I watched today was the Eureka Films release of this, and that one, the translation was a little different than I was used to, because there's a great line that I've seen before where because it's Yagyu's son is battling against Ogami-itto and his son, and he says, there he is with his warrior, I'm sorry. He says he's there with the son, S-U-N, at his back, and Ogami-itto's over there with his son, S-O-N, on his back. And so it was this nice, juxtaposition of the son, and they kind of translated around that, and they didn't have the poetry to it, which I was kind of sad about, but it's a great translation and a great version of it. And that was just DVD. I ended up picking up the Blu-ray Criterion set when that came out, because I wanted to see it in its full glory.
Well, and that's how I watched it. I watched it once again, on Filmstruck. And we're not paid by Filmstruck here, people, but it has all 6 parts on there in their full Blu-ray 1080p quality. And the translation is fantastic. Quality is fantastic. It looks great. I mean, if you're looking for a reason to get Filmstruck or try it for a month, I would say that the fact that they have all of these classic Japanese samurai films on top of, a huge library of stuff. The Criterion Collection it's hard enough to track down to some extent a lot of the older stuff on Criterion. I know that Criterion Collection, the laser discs are kind of the most sought after of any Criterion Collection stuff. But the fact that on Filmstruck they have a large portion of the library of the Criterion Collection should be reason enough, if not to be able to watch this movie just alone, or Kill from last week.
So yeah, I'm glad that you found the story a lot more straight ahead, because it is. The only thing that I found kind of confusing the very first time that I watched this was the going back and forth in time, and then I kind of figured it out right afterwards. I was like, oh, okay, now I know what's going on. Like, after they did it twice, I was like, okay, I got it now.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like, this reminds me of Kill a little bit, kind of not signaling that it's a flashback,
right,
is not very helpful.
Yeah, if you watch it again, you'll pick up on it a little bit more, because there's.
And I picked up on it during it. The issue is, it's just I don't really want to have that to be in question.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Right.
But, other than, like you said, the moving back and forth in time, it's very straightforward, very easy to pick up on.
It helps, too, that, like I said, Ogami looks so disheveled in the current scenes versus the flashbacks, and then also Daigoro being, 2 years younger in the flashbacks versus now. Like, it looks like he's not really at the point where, like, I guess he can walk and run and stuff, and he's definitely not at that point in the first scenes. Like, he seems like he's not necessarily a newborn, but he's only a couple months old in those early scenes.
And I like those early scenes too with Ogami's wife.
Yeah, Azami.
Ito's wife. Yeah, she's great. I mean, everything about this movie is really what I was expecting and wanting from a samurai film. And I kind of got everything I wanted in one neat little package. And it is very stylized too, which, I mean, for 21st century audiences, that's a huge plus. Because, I mean, a lot of people don't like to watch old westerns because some guy just gets shot, falls over the end. And this, you've got quote-unquote realistic violence.
Right.
Got guys getting their fucking heads chopped off. A dude gets his forehead split open. You have one character cut off at the knees.
Oh, yes. So
literally
good.
cut off at the knees.
Yeah.
Which, again, I mean, if we're talking about how this is one of I don't really know much about early comic book movies because there weren't a whole lot before Batman in the United States. But I'm talking about in regards to Japan, I'm going to assume that this was a very early adaptation of like a quote-unquote manga to the big screen.
Possibly. I do not want to bite on that one because, I mean, manga had been such an art form for those guys for a while. And, like, even, other stuff that Kazuo Koike wrote, like, I want to say he did... not Crimson Bat, but Lady Snowblood. So, like, his other stuff has also been adapted. And I'm thinking earlier stuff was as well, but I can't swear to any of that stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my whole point is just looking at something like this, it's crazy to me that in 1972, we've got a movie based on a manga.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. As far as, like, versus the United States, where it's like, there was, I mean, this, I will say, like, certain films are seen as being kind of trashy even over there. Not everything is high art for Japanese audiences, and this was kind of trashy entertainment. It wasn't necessarily...
It's very much exploitation.
Yeah, exactly. So, this being based on a comic book wasn't, like, oh, yeah, whatever, these guys... It was a low art being paired with a low art kind of thing. But there are people that raised everything to, high art. I'm sure that there were manga artists that were just like, oh my God, this guy is fantastic. He's the Alan Moore of Japan kind of thing.
Well, and so to answer your question from before, Kazuo Koike, obviously he did write, like you said, Lady Snowblood, but Lady Snowblood was after Lone Wolf and Cub. Even the film came out a year later, and the manga came out the year before the film did.
Okay.
So... It's still, again, like you said, with comparison to the fact that we're finally now in this country giving superheroes and comic book characters kind of their due, finally, and doing a good job of, like, the mainstream stuff. Obviously, there were people doing, a history of violence and stuff like that much longer before. You look at something like this and you're like, Jesus, Japanese cinema had been doing this for, like, 60 years. And we're just now like, oh, look at how great the MCU is. It's like, oh, Christ. Everyone else has been kind of a little bit more tuned in than we have been as a society long before.
Well, this is me talking out of my ass, but it's got to be a little bit easier for Japanese because they respect anime as being a real art form and as being a mainstream cultural touchstone, as opposed to us when a lot of people in the US are just like, oh, cartoons, those are for kids. So it's like, you can have stuff being adapted a lot earlier. You can have things with crazy special effects. You can have, like, your Ninja Scrolls and your all these kind of things where it's just like, we can't do that in live action, but sure enough, we can do it as a anime. We can take this manga to anime a lot easier than we can take manga to live action, except with stuff like this where you're like, okay, yeah, there's some supernatural stuff like in the fifth movie and maybe a little bit in the fourth movie, but nothing like, we don't necessarily have flying people other than Ogami-itto just flying through the air and throwing a spear down at some guy's head.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, I mean, it's just the way our country perceives what American artists do in comic books is, I mean, up until, the last a decade ago, comics weren't even cool. I mean, like, reading comics wasn't mainstream. And now I would say it's more mainstream than it has been in a long time, right?
And there's still a lot of people that chafe under the ideas of comic book movies being anything other than trash entertainment. It's just, Ethan Hawke is one person, but...
Someone else just said that too, right? Similar thing where, like, I don't want to see no superhero movies. Like, Jesus fucking Christ, get off your high horse.
Movies like Logan, movies like Captain America Winter Soldier, to me, they surpass the boundaries of just a comic book movie. Like, for me, Winter Soldier is much more in keeping with 70s spy thrillers than it is necessarily with a superhero film.
Oh, it was Jodie Foster.
Oh.
That's who it was.
Well, notice who's not in the MCU.
Yeah, the people that complain about it aren't in it. And, it must be nice to complain about the MCU and not be in it, but I guarantee you that those paychecks, if you got one from Marvel/Disney, are the biggest goddamn paychecks you'd ever get. I mean, look at Robert Downey Jr.
Oh, yeah. And it seems like the residuals from that, as long as the contracts were negotiated correctly, they'll be going on for a little while.
A little while, aka you'll be collecting residuals on your fucking deathbed.
Exactly.
Yeah. So again, it's funny when we come to something like this, a film from 1972 that does, from what I could tell, having read the first volume of the manga, it does it justice in a way that also is kind of surprising, because that's something that we as American fans of comic books always complain about, doing the source material justice. And like you said, the source material is almost storyboarded for the film.
Right.
In a way that, like, Robert Rodriguez did in Sin City, where he, was going from page to film almost one for one.
And we talked last week as far as Kiru with the idea of, like, references that we weren't necessarily picking up on, and just like, was that a nod to this movie? Was that a nod to that? And there's a lot of stuff going on in Ogami-itto, in the Lone Wolf and Cub movies, but it's not necessarily like you have to know this is a reference to this other thing. Like, there are little things, and you can pick them up depending on what translation you're watching or what kind of, supplemental materials you have. There might be some things that are explained on screen, or like just things in dialogue, like ogami. The word ogami, the name ogami, is like one letter off of okami, which is the word for wolf. So that's why he gets his name, Lone Wolf, is that it's very similar to to his actual name. And there are two guys, at least in the translation I was watching today. One's like, Wolf, and he's like, no, his name is Ogami, not Okami. So it's like, oh, okay. And then Azami, his wife, her name in apparently in Japanese flower language, which flowers all have meanings as well over there, and they do over here as well. Roses, love, gladiolus, death, etc. Azami is the flower of vengeance, so it's kind of nice that that's her name. So, but it's not one of those things where if we don't know it, we're not going to enjoy the film.
Right. No, yeah, you're completely right. That was kind of where we had a problem last week. We stumbled a little bit last week was with Kill. Definitely with Kill. So, well, let's take a quick break. We'll play some commercials, and when we get back, we'll finish up talking about the film.
Have a hunger for horror? A yen for Yelp yarns? Then give your blood-curdled bones a boon and tune in to Chronicles from the Crypt. Join sordid slime slingers Casualty Chris and Father Malone as they take on HBO's groundbreaking television series Tales from the Crypt. Here's what the rotting and rancid rabble are saying about Chronicles from the Crypt. Tune in to Chronicles from the Crypt. You have nothing to lose except your life.
Who is Carl Kolchak?
He's a reporter.
Now that is news, Vincenzo. News! And we are a news paper. We are supposed to print news, not suppress it.
With the INS.
What's an INS?
Independent news service, sir. Founded in 1904 by Enrico Paluzzi.
who seems to have a nose for the strange and unusual.
Well, last year in Las Vegas, I uncovered a series of murders that turned out to have been committed by a vampire.
And what is the Kolchak tapes?
It's a podcast.
All about Carl Kolchak,
What's a Kolchak?
the Night Stalker.
And where can you get it?
On iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and at www.kolchaktapes.com.
As foolish a game as any that Gory the Ghoul could make up.
Here's what some people are saying about the Projection Booth podcast.
Week after week, I'm mesmerized by the focus given great films and questionable films alike. But every episode is a learning and entertaining experience.
This is hands down the best movie podcast. They cover so many different genres across so many years, from obscure movies to blockbusters.
If there's only one podcast about movies and cinema that you listen to, make it this one.
The Projection Booth podcast, with new episodes available every week at projectionboothpodcast.com.
In 1985, a curious phenomenon occurred. The Twilight Zone returned to television, featuring all new tales of mystery and imagination from the minds of Ray Bradbury, Harlan Ellison, George R.R. Martin, and Stephen King. Dreams for Sale, the Twilight Zone 85 podcast looks back at that land of shadow and substance and re-examines the groundbreaking successor to Rod Serling's legacy. Featuring new interviews with the show's creators and cast, Dreams for Sale can be found on iTunes and at twilightzone85.com. Dreams for Sale. We'll be waiting for you in the Twilight Zone.
All right, we are back and we are finishing up talking about Lone Wolf and Cub, Sword of Vengeance. So you had told me last week to watch the second film first and then this film. I haven't gotten around to watching the second film yet, unfortunately. My weekend kind of devolved into not what I was expecting in the slightest. So, I'm kind of curious. You mentioned that in some of the later films there's supernatural aspects to what happens in the film, but where is the first film kind of in the grand scheme of the other films? Is this the best of the series? Is this the second or third best in the series?
For me, I love the second and third films the most. The first film is very solid. It does a good job of setting up stuff. But if you want to grab somebody, I usually show them the second film first. And I just give them like a 5-second thumbnail of who Ogami-itto is, why he's doing this, and just kind of set them loose.
I mean, it feels very much like an origin story, this first film does.
It is, yeah, but it's not like the fastest moving of them. Like the second film is more of a straightforward narrative, and it doesn't have flashbacks to it, and it has a lot of smaller stories within it that all build up to a larger story. Like there's the whole idea of here's 500 Rio to kill this person, please count it. And then he's just like, okay. And there's usually a test, like, is this really Ogami-itto? So they follow a pattern sometimes. And that second movie, that has that in it. And then the movie carries on. There's a lot of like little adventures. Yagyu Retsudo kind of pits some people against him, all this kind of stuff. And then we get back to, kind of like with this movie, we get back to that original, here's why you're here and here's this guy who you're going to kill, to the point where we might actually forget that. But all those little adventures really add up to a lot. And there's some really, I guess pun intended, killer violence in the movie as we go along. There's one scene of these female assassins, and they're being tested. Like this guy comes in and he's like, well, I want you to go kill Ogami-itto. Are your women good assassins? And she's just like, my women, are they great assassins? Bring in your best ninja and then have him leave the room. And so they have this guy come in and he's just like, oh, this is going to be a piece of cake. And these women make mincemeat out of him. And it is just amazing. And he, as he's trying to get out of the room, like he will not give up. They're like cutting off his ear, cut off his fingers, cut off his foot, cut off his arm, just all this stuff. And he's still, like, by the end, he's a bloody stump, still trying to wiggle his way out of the room because that's his one mission. It is fantastic.
So it sounds like the later films, because I mean, this film has violence in it, but I would say from what you just described versus this film is a little bit more subdued.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I would agree.
Okay. which is interesting because I would imagine at the time, I mean, like we talked about last week with Kill, it being buttressing right up against the Japanese New Wave movement, that this film takes some of the kind of points from Japanese New Wave. I mean, you see some of that in this film, especially with the portrayal of violence. I mean, the violence in Kill was very subdued. There was no blood. There was no dismemberment. When someone got shot, they just kind of fell down, or when they got stabbed, they just kind of fell down. In this, there's some of that, but then there's also characters being disemboweled and a guy having his legs cut off.
What's funny, because back in Sanjuro in, I think, 1962, the end of that, the final battle that Toshiro Mifune has with the guy, he doesn't want to have a battle with this character. And I think it's actually one of our two main guys from Kill. He doesn't want to have a battle with this guy. And he insists, it's this whole law of Bushido, all this kind of stuff. If the guy insists that he wants to have a duel, they have to have this duel. And it's this amazing sword fight that they have, and it's basically over in like 2 moves, and the guy just almost explodes. It's the first time, as far as I know, they use this like geyser of blood effect, and it was just crazy. So that's 62, and here we are 10 years later, and I don't know what the state of violence was in samurai films after that, but it's like you said, in Kill, which was 68, we're not really seeing that kind of stuff. We're seeing a limb chopped off here and there, a finger, those kind of things, but we're not seeing the geysers of blood. So I don't know where the geysers go between 62 and 72, but Lone Wolf and Cub fully embraces that idea.
And it sounds like the later films even more so.
Yeah. And I mean, they get ridiculous as they go along, some of them, but to the point where you're just like, I can't believe they're going to do this. And they do it, and it's just great. And yeah, there's some black magic. Actually, I think it's 6 is what I'm thinking. There's black magic in 6. And there's a little bit of black magic in 4, but not very much. It's just this one trick with a sword kind of thing. If you don't like rape, you're not really going to like these movies, because there's a lot of rape. Like, I think there's a rape in every single movie, which is really uncomfortable, but it is a good story motivator, I guess, but it's really tough to watch sometimes.
Yeah, the whole sexual rape scene in this film wasn't great.
Yeah.
It was the one, part of the film that hasn't aged very well.
Right.
And by very well, I mean not at all. So. And
luckily, the rape in, I think it's in 4, motivates the story pretty well, and it's almost off screen, so it's not as blatant as this one was, but there's another blatant rape in 3. But I have to say 3 is a really, really solid film. There's a lot of great stuff. And again, talking about Bushido and this whole am I a samurai? What makes a samurai? What's a good samurai? And that, because ogami-itto, he knows all the rules, and that's the greatest thing. Especially in the first one, when he takes off those white robes and he's got the chrysanthemum crest on him, and he's just like, you're going to point your swords at this crest, the crest that you've been serving for all these years, and all the guys immediately drop their swords down. It's just he knows all those ways to get around things. And there's even a point where he wins a sword fight because he gets between him and somebody higher than him, and a sword is pointing at ogami-itto, so it's almost pointing at this guy, he's protecting this dude. So there's a lot of great stuff with that.
Excuse me, sir, it's called Hollyhock?
Sorry, thank you.
Hollyhock. I laughed. It's just Hollyhock. I don't know why it's funny. It's just the alliteration in the word is pretty great. Yeah, like you said, it's what I was expecting from a samurai film, but at the same time, it wasn't, because it's so forward thinking. And it's so much fun. And it really is still watchable today, which I think is, a testament to the quality of the film when it was made in 72, is that it still holds my attention from the get-go. And I think that that's a really admirable quality of the film. Also, you get a bad guy with matchlock pistols shooting at a guy with a samurai sword, which I'm always a fan of.
That guy was great.
It never seems to go very well with the people with the guns. You notice that? Ever?
No. And they've been trying to reboot this thing for years.
Justin Lin, I think, wanted to do it at some point, and that was like 6 years ago.
Darren Aronofsky was tied to this movie for a little while.
No thanks. I would not watch that movie if Darren Aronofsky made it. That guy is... Nope.
And then, I don't know if you've ever seen Road to Perdition, but that's pretty much an American Lone Wolf and Cub story.
Never seen it, but I knew that it was based off of, takes influence from.
Right.
Sure. Which, I mean, again, it's a testament to the kind of the pop culture ties that this movie has.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they re-released the graphic novel, the manga, in the United States under Dark Horse's label. So,
and there's it was funny because for a lot of years, there were different names for these movies. So some people would call them the baby cart films. Some people would call them, in England, I think they would call them the perambulator films. So you could see perambulator to Hades kind of things. Some people call them the Kozuru Okami films. Some people call them the ogami-itto films. I think by now we've kind of all settled on Lone Wolf and Cub, which is good because for a while when you would try to order these things through mail order catalogs, which was the only way they were available for a long time, you had a hard time even finding them. There was a movie that was called Lone Wolf Sex Doll Case from the late 60s, I think. I can't remember, but because that had the words Lone Wolf in them, a lot of people ordered that through Video Search in Miami, and they'd be like, this isn't a Lone Wolf and Cub movie at all, but it was oh yeah, it's got Lone Wolf in the title, so it's got to be.
Well, and yeah, I mean, if you just go look at the Wikipedia page for the film, the first two films are pretty straightforward, but then the third film has two titles, and then...
I love the one that's the title that's called Lupine Wolf, and it's do you guys know what lupine means?
My favorite is Lone Wolf and Cub, Baby Cart in the Land of Demons, a.k.a. Shogun Assassin 4, 5 Fistfuls of Gold.
Nice.
Because the one thing I want to do is put 2 numerical values in the title of my movie. Jesus.
So good.
Well, that's, again, why Criterion is so great, because Criterion has become essentially the preservation library for films like this that is easier to find it now.
Exactly.
So, yeah, which, I mean, just listening to the way you're talking about having to find these films 20, 30 years ago sounds like an absolute and utter nightmare.
Yeah, it was. And then also you had to worry about your translations, your subtitles, and yeah, it was bad. I mean, it's still not good that it's so tough to find the TV series, and it's tough to find. Well, actually, the TV series is getting easier to find, but finding that, what a lot of people call Lone Wolf and Cub, the final conflict, that's tough to find as well.
Lone Wolf and Cub Under Siege 2?
Sure. Dark Territory.
Dark Territory. Lone Wolf and Cub Broken Arrow. Lone Wolf and Cub Japanese Horror Story Apocalypse.
Right.
Yeah, something like that. Something to that effect, because that's what some of these English titles sure sound like. Just absolute the most, nonsensical shit. A.K.a. Slashing Blades of Carnage. A.K.a. Shogun Assassin 5 Cold Road to Hell. Oh my god.
Yeah, there's one, it's a remake that they did in 93, I think, and some people call that Lone Wolf and Cub A Fistful of Sand.
Fistful of sand.
Yeah.
What?
Well, because the end takes place on a beach. So, yeah, I guess it makes sense, but I don't think so.
Grasping at straws.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think that this movie's a lot of fun, and I think this movie is, if I were to show someone a samurai film, I don't know if I would show them this one because I haven't seen the second one yet, but this would probably be the first series I would point someone to, and then I would probably say, don't get your hopes up because not every samurai film is like this.
I'm very curious to hear your take on the second film.
Yeah, I should have watched it. Like I said, just this weekend got out of hand. Got something to look forward to.
Stuff happens.
Yeah. Stuff happens. Vomit goes everywhere, as they would say. What would you give this film out of 5?
No, 5 out of 5.
Yeah, I'm with you. 5 out of 5, 100% all the way. I think this is one of the better films I've even watched for the Culture Cast, without a doubt. It's a lot of fun. It doesn't take itself too seriously. Like I said, the lead character is so much fun to just watch. He is like the ultimate samurai badass in the best way. And this movie's great. This movie's a lot of fun. And it lived up to the expectation I had when you were describing it last week.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. I didn't raise your expectations.
You did not overdo it. Let me put it that way.
Good. Whew.
So we'll take another break and we'll play a preview for the next Culture Cast.
May we have a word?
Let me guess. He's done something crazy.
Show me again, I want to break your neck. Welcome to the Looney Bus. McKenna. Nebraska Williams. That's Coyle. That's Lynch. With Merckx. Why are you here? I don't think you believe me. Come on, man. I had a run-in with a space alien.
This fucking guy is crazier than the rest of us. What the fuck was that?
That's the thing that killed my men. Alien.
Guess who's back? It ain't a fucking question. They know what they buy when the presence of a living legend.
Predators.
They exploit weakness. Tracks its prey. Like a game. Seems to enjoy it.
That's not a predator, that's a sports hunter.
Well, we took a vote. Predator's cooler, right? Fuck yeah.
Do you have a plan? Ex-sniper with PTSD and a team that's mental? You're insane, right?
Gentlemen, they're large. They're fast. And fucking you up's their idea of tourism.
Figured something out. I think we're gonna die. Just pointing it out.
Our big boy's a hunter. He brought his dogs with him.
Come on! You are now not in the presence of nice guys.
The Predator. Only in theaters, September 14th.
That's right. On the next Culture Cast, we are talking about The Predator, now with 100% less actual predators. But until then, until we talk about The Predator, what have you been up to, Mike? Where can people find you?
They can find me over at projectionboothpodcast.com and over on Twitter at ProBoothCast. And yeah, this is September, so still working on Checktember over at the Projection Booth. So we have talked about a few Czechoslovakian films, including one that you were on, Dita Saxova. So got to expose you to a little Czechoslovakian cinema. And it's been a very depressing month, so I'm excited to wrap up this whole month with a comedy called Who Would Kill Jesse, which is actually kind of a comic book movie because comic book characters come to life. So speaking of that.
That sounds a lot more uplifting than Dita Saxova, which is a great movie, but hell of a bummer of a film, folks.
Yeah, I don't think they mentioned the Holocaust at all.
Oh, lucky for anyone who gets to watch that movie. Jesus Christ. Please head on over to culturecast.com where you can find out more about today's episode. You'll find links over to iTunes where you can rate and review the show, and to Patreon. We've got some unreleased episodes, some donor tiers if you're interested in getting in on that. You can also check Mike and I out on a podcast we do called Dreams for Sale with a good friend of ours, where we talk about Twilight Zone 1985 once a month. You can also check me out on the Kolchak Tapes with You, where you and I talk about Kolchak, the Night Stalker. And you can also check me out on Chronicles from the Crypt, where I talk about Tales from the Crypt, which, again, all great podcasts. If you want to hear some stuff that's not about movies, that's probably the place to go. Big thanks, as always, to Eric and Wovoka for the intro song, and my good buddy Justin for the outro, and to you, Mike, again, coming in and talking some samurai films.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it.
And we'll catch you on the next Culture Cast.
You know how we do, I'm just two-step, straight in my right hand, phone in my other hand, getting to the money, oh man, two-step, posted with the crew, yeah, you know how we do,
hey, two-step, you know what I'm saying, 1, 2, 1, 2, big jam. understand? Catch me with my crew,